It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. And this is more of a critical thinking exercise than a wellness thing, but it does help with wellness. It helps with wellness because it helps unnecessary upset because you read shit into things that you don't have to read in. So this is going to be a little bit different from what I normally do, but I said I'd talk about this next week, so I'm recording it right away. That's one that closes the same from last week. But hear me out. This is good stuff, okay? Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. I'm going to have to get Eileen to redo my support thing because now I have to put the bubbles in. The It's Not Therapy bubbles, the chats that we're doing. Super stoked about that. Always nice when a new idea works. It's been a lot of work. And it has been really practicing the listening skills because of the amount of feedback. And I mean, I was joking a while back about the contradictory feedback I've gotten about it. And that's one of those ones that, when you get contradictory feedback, it can be incredibly frustrating. Or it can be something you process and recognize that it's part of it, because opinions are, even the best opinions are usually subjective in terms of what do you like, what do you respond to, right? That's inherently subjective. And so it's a question of making sure you're not assigning a binary to something that isn't. I mean, the example I used a few weeks back was the autistic person versus person with autism. And there's no winning. So it's like, okay, we're going to remove the word autism from the title. Talking to neurotypicals. Boom, there. Problem solved. We're just avoiding it completely. Instead of sacrificing one group or the other and deciding, okay, well, there's just no way to not piss off someone, so we're going to piss off this group. You find a third way, right? You go, all right, can we not use this word at all? Can we sidestep the problem completely? But that requires stepping back and making sure you're not thinking in chunks that are too big. And this comes down to a technique I learned called active listening, but I've expanded it to how you process information as well. Because active listening is just a series of, before you go on, the reason it's active is somebody tells you something, right? Something I did bother them. Nobody likes to hear that they upset someone. Well, sociopaths do. But, and yeah, I did say that I like bugging turfs. So, not no one, but most of the time, if you care about something, if you want someone, you want to maintain a relationship with someone, you're not deliberately upsetting them, right? And an upset person can tend to say things in a way that might be indelicate. And it's real easy to intellectualize and jump on them and say everything they did wrong with the way they presented it to you. Does that help solve the problem? No. You can set a boundary without that. And, back in the day, I would have just gone full Wolverine and claws out, roar. You come at me, I'm going to come at you. That's my natural reaction. That's what my physiology tells me to do, which is somewhat antisocial. So I go, okay, don't be Wolverine, be Beast. Hang upside down and read a book, right? Like, just chill, man. Chill. Like, Xavier that shit or something like that. Don't be Wolverine. Everybody likes Wolverine in the comic. Wolverine in real life is kind of scary, right? And so I changed the archetype. I think in a different way. And I guess because, you guys have seen my characters. Um, I can flip personas. I can work in character. It's a really good skill, but it's like, all right, we're not going to attack the perceived threat. We're gonna catch it and hold it and send it back. It's like um the shield block, the counter, the timed counter in video games. Instead of just having the shield up, or instead of just mashing the attack, it's ching. Properly timed attack. Boom. You have to learn it for Dark Souls games. It's a good skill. It's a mindset. Counter. But it's okay. What I understand you're telling me is I said this thing, didn't intend to upset you, but it hit you the wrong way. And I didn't mean to do that. Did I get that right? And that usually takes the temperature down. But what it also does is it does a few things. You're backing off, so you're giving the other person an off-ramp. But it's also allowing any miscommunications to be cleared up before you proceed. And there are certain red flags in a conversation, or yellow flags, that I stop and go, whoop, okay, that's a breaker. We need to slow down. The word should, instant breaker. I instantly slow down when someone comes out with should. Because should is an indication of norms. Norms are often unspoken. And so people may not relate to norms or understand norms in the same way. And that can lead to very real miscommunications. Because the one, I talk about this all the time, the example that I have is ignorant versus stupid. Where I grew up, which, was a neighborhood with a lot of black people in it, you didn't call people stupid because it was sensitive. It was poverty plus racialized. Black people historically were seen as scientifically not as intelligent as white people. And I think part of the reason I'm so averse to science about humans is stuff like that. So we didn't say, don't be stupid, or you're being stupid. We said you're being ignorant. Because ignorant just means you don't know something, not you're dumb. It's not you are never going to be able to understand this. It's you just don't understand it yet. But people who were raised in, there's no easy way, there's no soft way to say this. People who are raised in whiter neighborhoods read ignorant as stupid. And so I've had people go absolutely bonkers on me for saying you're being ignorant. And like there's even a softening if you're trying to be kind of jokey about it or gentle, you go you ignorant instead of you ignorant. It's kind of playful, right? It's like the nuance of the C-bomb in the UK. But that doesn't translate to all people. And so some people have gotten really angry. You're calling me stupid. I didn't call you stupid. Ignorant means stupid, not to me. And that's when a more emotional reasoner will accuse me of lying. And that's funny. It's one of those moments where it's like, oh man, I was you once. That's a Wolverine response, right? That's I'm feeling threatened, lash out, fling an accusation, must win. Your likelihood of losing of just blowing up a relationship, especially on social media and possibly getting blocked because you seem deranged, is very high if you start doing that. And, if you're trolling somebody and you're just trying to annoy them, have at it. But if you actually want a person to continue to speak to you, that's the stuff that you got to avoid doing. And this is where people, but, what if they are lying? They're not going to tell me if they're lying. And people like, you're making fun. That tone that I use there is things I tend to recognize I have done in myself. And so I'm kind of making fun of myself a little bit there. People misconstrue that tone all the time. Because I have, because of my personal experience and my own trauma, the liar thing, it used to be an instant, like 0 to 100 fight response, right? Fight or flight, just get it to go away. And I had to learn to stick handle that. I had to learn to recognize the tightening I get in my chest and let it release, right? Don't continue to engage from that state, because you're more likely to not speak as precisely if you do that. And so, it's instead of you're a liar, because then people say, well, you're just expecting me to take things on faith. No, there are ways to draw a person out. And there's a way to measure whether they are coming at you authentically that doesn't involve calling them a liar. Because think about it. If they aren't lying, as is the case with me, and you've called them a liar, well, you've just accused them of something that isn't true. That's going to be obvious to somebody who's less emotionally unbalanced at that moment. And you're going to look bad. You're going to look like you were just nasty and leveled a false accusation. So instead of going, you're a liar, in the case of, I don't use the word that way. I mean it in a different way. What do you mean by that? Okay, you give them a chance to explain, right? This is what Camille Vasquez did to Amber Heard on the stand, by the way, with the donate versus pledge thing. Really, you use donate and pledge the same way. Yeah. Affirmative, right? Really? Because I don't see you using it interchangeably in any of the other statements. Any of the statements you've made is pretty emphatically donate. You're not saying pledge. You only started using pledge when the donations being received were called into question, right? And then it's like, you start getting the cognitive overload, right? When people start, their cadence changes, they stumble over their words more. That's an indication of cognitive overload. That indicates that they're under stress in that moment. They're holding something back. They're choosing their words more carefully. And then it's trying to get a middle ground. You realize most people don't use those words interchangeably, right? Yeah. An honest person will go, yeah, I see that. A person trying to hang on to the narrative will go, that's the way I use the word, not giving anything, right? And then, then you give the person an opportunity to come clean, right? Like, you didn't donate the money. You probably had your reasons for saying it. Okay, you misspoke. That's not quite what Camille Vasquez did, but this is what you do in a less adversarial environment. But it's like, you misspoke. It's okay. We all do it. No problem. If the person won't back down and admit the contradiction, then it's bad faith. So you don't have to accept self-ID, as people say, right? There are ways of confirming that somebody's coming at you authentically. You're not going to get 100% unequivocal proof in a lot of cases. It's usually inferred, right? It's easier to disprove something actively. That's why it's like you can't prove a non-event. You can prove somebody was at a different place than they claim, but it's that whole, where were you on the night in question? I was home alone and nobody saw you. Nope, that's, you're kind of fucked. But that's why it's innocent until proven guilty. And innocent until proven guilty, it's so weird. We live in an age where allegedly smart people say things like, no group of people deserves blanket presumption of innocence. If you're coming at something from a state of calm, from a borrowed place, you recognize, no, presumption of innocence is your friend. It's a very useful communication tool. You give somebody every benefit of the doubt, dishonest people will still hang themselves. Because you'll start discovering more and more contradictions in what they're saying. But that's another way you have to watch your emotional reactions to things so that you don't go, say, into white knight mode, right? And somebody says, oh, they were so horribly mistreated. Oh my God, I'm going to get them. That whole thing. It's totally fine to do that when somebody is a really, really good friend of yours and they wouldn't mislead you on something like that. They could be mistaken, but not mislead you, right? But if it's somebody you don't really know that well, chill in acting on your suspicion. It's a very good skill to learn to take a moment to let that initial pop, that initial surge dissipate before you act. It may feel like you have to give an answer right away, but you don't. That's a high pressure sales tactic, and that's a way manipulators manipulate. Doing a bunch of sales training jobs. We'll give you 30% if you sign today. That usually means that if you shop around, you'll find another company at the same price. Because why would they just give you 30% off? Then they're not making, how much markup are they padding on this thing, right? It's a high pressure sales tactic. So anybody that expects you to just go to war right away, that's a red flag. But this is why it's important when someone's saying something. I mean, especially with media, like, news media lately. It's gotten so bad that I've been following this Emergencies Act stuff in Canada. People keep calling it the EA, the EIA, and I'm like, what does a game company have to do with this? I'm like, call it the Emergencies Act. I'm a gamer. But it's interesting to see the definition creep happening in the press, because there's specific definitions of the bar that must be met to invoke the act, and it's very specific Westminster system language that the media reduces to something that they can say faster. And so instead of it being, threats, or I forget, it's like threats or the potential for threats. The word got changed to harm. Now, threats and harm are obviously not the same standard, and I'm getting this wrong, right? This is just an example of how the terms creep. And that's why whenever I'm reading an article and there's a little hyperlink on a fact, you bet your ass I click on that hyperlink. And if it's paywalled, or if I can't access it, or it's a dead link, nope. I will even Google the study if it doesn't come up, because it is amazing how many articles hyperlink to a study that doesn't actually say what it claims. And most people, I don't have time for this. Well, if you're going to act on a piece of information, you have to make time. Because this is how broken telephone happens, right? Remember that game? I don't know if we play it anymore. But you whisper something to one person and it goes around and you see how close it was to the original message. And a lot of the time it shifts as it goes around, the 15 to 20 people in the circle. That happens with human communication. People think they understand. But unless you confirm the understanding, you don't know. And I see so many people go, and and just so people know, with the stuff in the media, it's not necessarily that a reporter is deliberately lying. A couple things can happen. A reporter doesn't actually understand what they're reading. They rush and get it wrong. And this happens less now because they don't want to pay for editors. But when I was doing stuff back in the day, I'd submit an article and an editor would helpfully change my copy to make it snappier. And then either they'd publish it without telling me and I'd eat shit for it. Or I'd have to fight with them saying that statement is no longer factual because of the word change. And a lot of the time the editors would get really kind of grumpy with me because, no, it's fine. People mean the same thing. It's like, but I'm not I believe it's changed. And there was some tough ones. The absolute worst one ever done to me was I did an article on empathy gaming for the National Post. It is weird now because the National Post has gone so right-wing that they think they'd never do this. But while Gamergate was just starting to calm down, I wrote an article on games that encourage empathy for the National Post, the Post Arcade section, but it ended up getting published in the art section. I think it actually made it into the paper, which didn't happen often. But they put a dig at Gamergate in the article that I did not write. And so I was pissed. I said, you can't do anything about the paper copy, but get that off of the online edition. Do you know what you have done to my social media mentions right now? Because I was just trying to move on. I was trying to avoid it. And some cutesy editor put words in my mouth. Happens all the time. And so don't necessarily assume nefarious intent. It's sloppiness. But it does happen. And that's why it's really, really important to check it out, to avoid making shorthands, avoid making leaps in logic that can make you look really stupid. Because, like I said, one, you may be getting upset and you don't need to. Two, it's a great way to end up looking like an asshole and not understanding why. And the number of times I've ended up blocking someone because they accused me of something. And I'm like, that is not what that word means to me. Oh, come on. That word means that way to everybody. Rare processing type, right? Not exactly neurotypical. No, it doesn't mean that to me. Oh, come on. You're being disingenuous. You can say I'm an asshole. You can say I'm aggressive. You can say I'm a lot of things. But one thing you cannot say about me is that I am ever being disingenuous. Even my dunking on turfs is earnest. Like, I legitimately do not like them. I am not concerned trolling. That animosity is real. I think they're bullies, and I think um they're using sexist stereotypes to try to whimper to get their way because the facts aren't on their side. But that's a sincere animosity, right? And I have to keep it in check. Like I said, got to make sure I don't go over the line. But that's the thing. I'm invested in the principle of the thing, but I'm not emotionally compromised because I move slowly enough in conversations. And the thing you're going to notice when you start adopting these slow down tactics, the making sure you understand things before you move on, it's going to drive people crazy. And that's okay, because those people aren't your people. If anybody complains about you honestly attempting to make sure you understand what someone is saying before you move on, tells you somebody might be manipulating. And some people just have I notice, I call it the YouTube debate conversation style. It didn't start with YouTube, but I see it all over the place with like skeptic channels and things like that. When someone can't argue a point, because let's face it, a lot of those skeptic channels just live to argue and show how smart they are, right? But instead of acknowledging a point, like, yeah, that's correct, or yeah, I agree with that, here's another thing, they don't focus on any agreement. They just jump to the one point they want to pick at. And that's faux intellectualism. A person who is really in a conversation for just a good conversation doesn't do that, because consensus is powerful regarding persuasion. You know, I completely understand what you're saying on that point. I agree. I'm not arguing that point. I'm talking about this other thing. You know? That's powerful. Because especially if someone's observing, they're like, okay, that person just conceded a point there. They're being reasonable. This other person isn't letting go of anything. They seem deranged. It's a tactic as well as it's a persuasion tactic as well as a sincere attempt to understand. So it's double whammy. It's a good use of effort. But so many people don't do that because they're so afraid of getting gotcha'd. And again, if you're constantly in a state of everybody's out to get me, that's a very toxic environment. You should be able to trust the people you interact with on a regular basis, and you should not need to seek out people to start fights with on the internet, you know, or in person or anything like that. You know, the remaining I haven't gotten a lot of time into is the people who their process of understanding is argumentative in structure. And that's something of an early life trauma thing, and I feel bad for the people who've developed that communication style, because it does get them into trouble, and I feel badly for them, but it's a skill they're going to have to improve, because no one wants to talk to somebody who's constantly going, but, yeah, but, the number of times I say on social media, okay, that's a point. That wasn't what this conversation was about. Oh, but it's what I want to talk about. That's nice. I don't care. That wasn't the topic of conversation, but it's what I want to talk about. Okay, you're a waste of my time. You can't share. It's very, very important to show that you can share in a conversation, that you can absorb information, not just dispense words. That will help you in every communication aspect of your life. Dating, work, friendships, family. Slow it down. Make sure you really understand what the person is saying. Not you think you understand. You get a confirmation that you understand before proceeding. It may seem like a lot of effort off the top, but in the long run, it means you have to do less cleanup. And it's great. It also, if you don't understand something, your boss puts you on the spot or something like that, you don't know how to answer, it's a great way to give yourself a moment to think. What do you think about this? Well, if I understand the question you're asking me and repeat what you understand, it gives you a moment to compose your thoughts, right? So hopefully that helps. Like I said, more of a critical thinking skill here than the typical Wellness Wednesday, but it really does help you conserve your emotional spoons, your reserves. And that's what we're here for. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. This is what we do in some Leanna Care sessions. So, if you want to buy a Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Very, very, very important. And check out Bubbles. There are some It's Not Therapy bubbles related to communication. You won't regret joining them. So thanks for watching and be well.